My younger sister, Nancy, noticed me at the airport and smiled as she said, "I wish you could have come to my wedding, Rolla." Her words dripped with sarcasm, and there was a reason for it. She had claimed she was pregnant with my husband Ben's child and had taken him away from me. Marrying a pilot must be a point of pride for her, especially since she had taken him from her nagging sister while we were living together. The sense of superiority must be immense. Like a spiteful jab at me, they had a grand wedding and bragged about their plans to move overseas. Now, Nancy was waiting for a flight to go abroad, supposedly to scout for their new home. She was carrying a large rolling suitcase and a duffel bag, clearly in high spirits. On the other hand, I came to the airport almost empty-handed, ready to leave as soon as I finished the task I had mentioned over the phone. I made sure to travel light so I could head home quickly once it was done. Maybe she wanted to see me sulking, but I wasn't just going to stand there silently. I knew Ben's character better than anyone, having been with him far longer. Feigning indifference, I handed Nancy an envelope containing some crucial information. "Here, you forgot this," I said, presenting it as a gift. "My name is Rolla. I come from a coastal area, and I'm a 40-year-old housewife married to a pilot. We don't have children, so it's just the two of us living together. My husband Ben is 47, and we met at a party arranged by a mutual friend. At the time, I had just left my parents' home and was in my mid-20s, not really thinking about marriage, just attending various parties to meet new people. I believed that the more men I met, the better my chances of building a happy family. I was never one to fall in love at first sight, so I tended to prioritize personality over looks when dating, though I had a weakness for persistence. Ben's first impression was that of a man familiar with women. He was good at keeping the mood lively and seemed very friendly, though there was a hint of ulterior motives in his attentiveness. I didn't expect to have anything to do with him in the future, but life is full of surprises. Ben persistently pursued me, and after one dinner together, I found myself in a relationship which has now lasted over 10 years. Friends who have known me for a long time often say they never imagined I would end up with someone like Ben, and I feel the same way. True to my initial impression, Ben often spent time with other women before we got married. When I confronted him about his infidelity, "The only one I love is you, Rolla," he would say to deflect my accusations. I wasn't initially inclined to get involved with any man, so each time I would just say, "Please stop cheating on me," without imposing any real penalties. Despite this, our relationship was surprisingly enjoyable. He always took time off to celebrate anniversaries and birthdays with me, and even after we started living together, I never felt like household chores were dumped on me. On weekends, he would clean without me asking, and since I enjoyed cooking, it was never a burden. In fact, I found it fun, and he usually took care of the dishes. If it weren't for the cheating, I would say I found a really great person. So when he proposed, I felt the benefits outweighed the drawbacks and accepted. Of course, I won't tolerate any more cheating behavior if we're getting married, I made sure to tell him firmly. The wedding was grand, thanks to Ben's income and savings, much higher than an average office worker's. He allowed me to wear any expensive dress I wanted, and the food and wedding cake were top-notch, making it a lavish wedding. I remember my family being very happy, which made me glad. My sister Nancy kept saying, "Rolla, I'm so jealous," as she watched me in my beautiful dress, dreaming of her own wedding day. However, not even a few years after that happy wedding, Ben started cheating again. We lived in an apartment complex with many residents, and our place was surrounded by nosy neighbors who loved gossip. "I saw your husband with another woman." The news always reached me quickly. In such times, I would line up air fresheners at the entrance, urging Ben to confess. Even if he admitted to it, he didn't change his behavior, and I didn't expect him to. Strangely, I never felt the urge to divorce him. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know, but for now, all I do is repeatedly tell him not to cheat anymore. One late summer day, after seeing Ben off and hanging up the laundry, the doorbell rang. It was too early for a delivery, so I checked the intercom, and there was my sister Nancy with a large rolling suitcase. I quickly said through the screen, "I'll open it now," and hurried to finish hanging the laundry. Even though she's my sister, I didn't want her to see all the signs of everyday life. Nancy and I have a significant age gap. I'm 40, and Nancy is 27, a 13-year difference. It's more like an aunt-niece relationship than sisters. After a little time had passed, I finished hanging the laundry and opened the door to welcome her. "Why did you come suddenly? And with such a large suitcase?" "I quit my job and couldn't stay at home anymore." She explained that she had been kicked out because she couldn't pay rent after quitting her job. According to her, last October, she was transferred to a new department where her new boss, a female employee, treated her harshly. Only she was given the cold shoulder, and despite her efforts, she was frequently scolded for being slow at work. Recently, she hadn't been given any tasks to do. She told me, a bit breathlessly, that she asked the HR department for a transfer again but was rejected, so she submitted her resignation. I felt a bit sorry for her, remembering how happy she was when she got the job offer in the city, only to leave after more than 4 years because of interpersonal issues. Nancy has always been a bit spoiled but generally liked by older people, so this was unusual for her. It just goes to show there are all kinds of people. I quit that company on my own terms. After quitting at the end of May this year, she hadn't saved any money, so she couldn't pay the rent and got evicted. Her salary was slightly above the average for someone in their 20s, but it's baffling how she could end up with zero savings. I wondered if she had been buying expensive cosmetics and branded goods. I've always been worried about her impulsive and reckless behavior, and seeing that she hasn't grown out of it even as an adult, I felt a bit exasperated. By now, she should be independent and responsible for her actions, but what to do? "So, what are you going to do now?" "If you don't have a place to live, you should either return home or find a job that offers room and board. There are many things you need to do." It doesn't seem like she's looking for a new job, and as her older sister, I need to know what she's planning to do. Just as I was thinking that, "Rolla, let me stay for a while." "What?" I was quite shocked because I never imagined that at this age, I would end up living with my sister again. Of course, I understand that staying in this city is the most convenient option for Nancy instead of returning home. If she went back home, our parents would interrogate her, and she would have to travel back to her hometown. If she wants to continue living in the city, it's natural to avoid going back home. However, it's not something I can decide alone, so I have to wait for Ben to come back. "Let's talk to Ben first." "Okay. Please." I wish she would try to handle things on her own a little more. Contrary to my feelings, Ben came home and immediately agreed to let Nancy stay after hearing her situation. I wasn't enthusiastic, but since Ben had approved, I had no choice but to accept it. I decided to let Nancy use the guest room we have for unexpected visitors and showed her to the room. And so, our life with the three of us, Ben, Nancy, and me, began. Although Nancy, the freeloader, voluntarily helped with meals and chores, she showed no sign of looking for a new job. I can't have her thinking she can stay indefinitely. Since Nancy has no savings, we are essentially supporting her with our finances, and I don't want her to take it easy. Is it mean of me to think this way? I want to return to our life as a couple as soon as possible, so I asked her, "Have you found a job yet?" "Well," she replied vaguely. As Ben was away at work, the time I used to have to myself was now occupied by Nancy, and I began to find her presence increasingly annoying. Having someone else around during the time I used to enjoy freely by myself feels like a greater intrusion than I imagined. There's always someone around, and I have to be considerate, so it's far from relaxing. While I can tolerate cooking more food since cooking is my hobby, the extra work in every other aspect is bothersome. Occasionally, when I checked the guest room, I'd see her watching streaming videos or eating snacks from the pantry, living a quite lazy lifestyle. Recently, she hasn't even been helping with the chores, and day by day, my anger was building up. Soon, it will be a month since Nancy started staying with us, but there's no sign she's looking for a new job. Unable to stand it any longer. When are you going to start working? I knocked on the open door of the guest room and asked in a slightly harsh tone. Nancy, without even looking away from the movie she was watching online, said, I know, but... and continued eating her snacks. At that moment, a switch flipped inside me. How about showing some effort in looking for a job? Nancy, startled by my raised voice, paused the movie and looked at me. Could you please change your sloppy lifestyle? This isn't your home. Unable to contain my rising emotions, I blurted out the words I had been holding back for the past month at Nancy. After saying it, I regretted not being calm, but those feelings were blown away by Nancy's next words. I said I get it. You're my big sister, so take care of me. I wondered why I had to take care of my adult sister, and as I was about to speak further, I paused and took a deep breath to calm down. I thought I knew Nancy's selfishness well, but it had worsened with adulthood. Thinking that nothing I said would get through to Nancy. If you're just going to be lazy, then leave. I told her in a low voice before leaving the guest room. From then on, her lazy behavior escalated. She started using the guest room as if it were her own, eating the snacks I had bought without throwing away the trash, and leaving her clothes and used items lying around. Every time I saw Nancy's slovenly behavior, I would reprimand her, but she would argue back, leading to frequent arguments. I was fed up with living under this stress. Then one day, I ran into our neighbor Kate at the supermarket and heard an unbelievable story. Hey, I saw Ben and Nancy in town last Sunday. Thinking it was unusual for Nancy to go out, I waited for Kate to continue, who leaned in and said, and they were really close, like. Just as I was thinking why she would notice such things, Kate dropped a bombshell. I think they might be involved romantically. I tried to take it with a grain of salt, considering Kate's love for gossip, but her confidence bothered me. For the time being, I smiled and said, thanks for letting me know. Before parting ways with her. Even a philanderer like Ben should understand the consequences of getting involved with his wife's sister. Until then, I still wanted to believe that Ben maintained certain boundaries with women. A few days later on a holiday. As I went to get the mail in the entrance hall, I was approached by Susan, who lived on the same floor, and she brought up Ben and Nancy again. Yesterday, I saw Ben and Nancy driving together. They seem really close. Unlike Kate, Susan didn't seem to be probing into a romantic relationship, but rather commenting on the family's closeness with a kind smile. However, I had been out meeting a friend yesterday, and Ben was supposed to be at work, so Nancy should have been home alone. Susan knew Ben's car, so she must have really seen them. I thanked Susan politely and hurried back to the apartment, calling Ben and Nancy into the living room. After taking a deep breath to calm myself, I asked in a composed tone. Did you two go out together yesterday? Ben, showing no sign of guilt. Yeah. Casually said. I took Nancy to the employment office. You've been telling her to get a job, right? Ben said, to which Nancy added. Yeah, he just gave me a ride. Matching his tone, so I decided to drop the issue for now and brought up what Kate had mentioned. By the way, a neighbor mentioned that you two seemed pretty close. Ben, crossing his arms. What's that about? Said. She's your sister-in-law, so of course, you should be nice to her. When he took that indignant attitude, as if he was the wronged party. Is that all you wanted to say? She said and returned to her room. When I looked at Nancy, she turned her face away awkwardly and then went back to the guest room. I felt something was off, but I couldn't get any information out of either of them. After that, life continued with Nancy lounging around in the guest room, not even trying to find a job. I got so tired of arguing with her about getting a job that I minimized our interactions and avoided her as much as possible. On the surface, it might have seemed like we were living peaceful days. Then, about 2 years later, I was in my room getting ready to go shopping when Nancy suddenly called me to the living room. She had a slightly triumphant look on her face, so I thought she was going to tell me she'd found a job. I'm pregnant. But instead, She sat me down on the sofa and said. I couldn't understand what she meant. Pregnant? What do you mean? I asked again. I mean, I'm pregnant with Ben's child. It felt like a blow to the head. I remembered Kate's words from 2 years ago. I couldn't believe that Nancy and Ben had actually gotten involved. Seeing how shaken I was, Nancy seemed to relish it and added, Ben said he'll take responsibility and marry me. She looked down at me triumphantly. Ben is mine now, he declared. That night, when Ben got home, I demanded an explanation. He apologized deeply. I want to raise the child, he said. I had secretly hoped he would deny it, so his response confirming it was hard to accept. That night in bed, I kept thinking about what to do next, but I decided to stop and sleep, hoping that I'd come up with a good solution the next day. The next morning, I woke up early and opened my computer to search. I wanted to look up everything, from the compensation I could get in a divorce due to his infidelity to what would happen with our apartment. The thought of him not only being with another woman but also getting her pregnant made divorce the only option in my mind. I found that a downloadable divorce form would suffice, so I downloaded the PDF and went to a convenience store to print it out. As I left the house, I felt like Nancy was watching me from her room, but I didn't turn around. After taking care of things at the store, I came home and shut myself in my room. I checked to make sure I had all the necessary documents for the divorce and filled out the form. Since he wanted to raise the child, it meant he wanted to divorce me, so it should be easy to settle without going to court. I summarized the terms on paper, and with the filled-out divorce form, I knocked on Ben's room door. He opened the door and let me in immediately. I got him to agree to the divorce, the $30,000 compensation I demanded, and the sale of our apartment. I wondered how he and Nancy planned to support themselves, but I didn't care enough about the two traitors to change my demands. After the apartment was sold, we started living separate lives, but soon Nancy called me with a snide tone. We're going to have an even more luxurious wedding than Rolla had, just the two of us. I honestly didn't care at all and said, good for you. But Nancy continued, we're moving abroad too. She sounded so excited that it was palpable even over the phone. She probably thinks she took Ben from me. It's funny to think she's going on a trip before moving overseas without really knowing Ben. Actually, Ben was fired 2 months before Nancy announced her pregnancy. At that time, he still had enough savings to get by, so I didn't feel the need to tell Nancy, and it seems Ben also kept it a secret. The reason, as you can guess, is a woman. He was caught having an affair with a married flight attendant and was fired for it. He also had to pay a large settlement to the flight attendant's husband. On top of that, he paid me compensation, so most of Ben's savings are likely gone. I never thought my decision to let him be, thinking he had learned his lesson, would allow me to get back at Nancy like this. Life is full of surprises. It's really foolish of her to call me with snide remarks without knowing anything. When I asked when they were leaving for their trip, Nancy said it was the day after tomorrow. So, I'll bring over the things that got mixed up, I said and hung up. On the day of their departure, I headed to the airport and looked around for Nancy. After walking a bit, I spotted her alone in front of a cafe in the airport. Nancy noticed me and, Rolla, she called out, immediately following with, why didn't you come to the wedding? With a sarcastic tone. I replied, more importantly, and got to the point. Here, this is Ben's. I handed her an envelope. What's this? Nancy's face changed color as she opened it. Your husband Ben is not a pilot, he's unemployed now. Nancy started to tremble and glared at me. Stop lying! She shouted. I bet there's almost nothing left of his savings. But I calmly said. I explained the whole situation to Nancy in detail. She began shouting. I can't believe it! Drawing cold stares from passersby as she stormed off. Really, thinking she could get happiness easily is a big mistake. I murmured to myself, feeling a bit relieved as I left the airport. After that, I used the compensation and proceeds from selling my house to open a bistro in a town away from the city, making use of my love for cooking. It's not fancy, but the locals love it, and business is decent. As for Nancy and Ben, it seems they're both having a hard time. Nancy returned to her parents' home when she gave birth, seeking help, but left the baby there and disappeared. She probably couldn't stand the scolding from her parents after hearing the whole story from me. Ben, meanwhile, was told by my parents that he couldn't see the child, and even though he hasn't found a new job, he insists on paying child support. It's unclear if he can't face reality or if he truly cares about the child, but his future looks bleak. In the end, it's not clear if Nancy and Ben have split up, but I heard they still haven't met their child, whom my parents are raising. It's sad that he wanted a child and divorced me for it, but this is the reality. I decided not to get involved with insincere people anymore. I love my current life, so I aim to continue running my bistro, loved by the local community, for a long time. I'm divorcing you because I got an employee pregnant, and I'm going to give her the position of being the company president's wife. My husband Dylan said, without a hint of guilt, thrusting the divorce papers in front of me. Are you serious? She's only 23, right? I might have felt a bit of affection for my husband of 30 years, Dylan. But he trampled over my feelings with ease. Are you joking? Unlike you, a housewife, I'm the president of a company. His usual attitude dried up any love I had for him completely. And my heart, now empty, filled with hatred. Okay, I understand. And with that, our 30 years of marriage came to an end. He really doesn't understand anything, does he? He's so impulsive. Saying I wouldn't care if he regretted anything that happened afterward, I signed the divorce papers. Then, 2 weeks after the divorce, I kept quiet, but that girl you got pregnant. What? Dylan, who had a lavish wedding ceremony abroad, was about to learn a terrible truth. My name is Abby. I am 56 years old, the same age as my husband, Dylan, who runs a company. Dylan and I met at a party. Coming from the countryside, all my classmates were either married or had children already. I wasn't exactly in a rush, but seeing my close friends' families, I yearned for a family of my own. Especially since I was raised by my grandparents after my parents died when I was young. To be honest, I wasn't very close to my grandparents. Probably because my father had eloped with their only daughter, my mom. So, I always dreamed of building a bright and happy family of my own. And then, by chance, I met him at a party. Having grown up in a single-parent family, I can understand your feelings to some extent. By the way, I'm thinking of starting a company and would like to do it with you, Abby. Would you date me? I think we could make it work together, with someone as intelligent and goal-oriented as you. His sincere words attracted me, and we started dating. That's when my fate began to spiral out of control. We dated with the intention of marrying, and eventually got married at the age of 26. 30 years have passed since then, just the two of us. We don't have children. Because we were not blessed with any. We married at a good age, and started preconception care when we were both 30, after the conversation about establishing his company had settled. But it didn't work out. He seems to believe that the reason for not getting pregnant always lies with the woman. The first half year felt normal, but as time passed, 1 year, 2 years, his attitude worsened. There must be something wrong with you for not being able to get pregnant. Go get yourself checked out. I know a guy who runs a gynecology clinic. Go to him, he said. I really didn't want to. He made it sound simple, but gynecology is a very delicate field. I would have been slightly okay if the doctor was a stranger, but the idea of going to someone he knew made me uncomfortable. I said I'd prefer to see my regular doctor, and he frowned and started complaining. "Does that mean you don't trust my acquaintance?" "It's not that. I didn't say that. It's just that my regular doctor knows my body better." "Fine, do whatever you want. But don't expect me to deal with whatever happens later." Angry, he left somewhere. Despite upsetting him, I strongly felt that I should be able to choose my own doctor and proceeded as planned. The result was that there was nothing wrong with me. But to know for sure whether it was infertility, he needed to be tested too, which I suggested. Yet, this only made him more upset. "There's no way I'm infertile." What an irresponsible thing for a doctor to say. This is exactly the problem. If we had gone to my acquaintance from the start, none of this would have happened. But it's too late now. I've decided that the failure of the preconception care is your fault, so deal with it yourself. This was how the issue of preconception care remained unresolved, and we just dragged it along until we were over 40. I was open to the idea of having children if I could get pregnant, but it seemed Dylan wasn't. He seemed to think it was embarrassing to get pregnant after 40, and from that time on, we lived together as a couple but as if we were complete strangers to each other. Still, as a company owner, he needed a successor. So, we decided to adopt a child with no relatives and welcome him as our own. Our son's name is Eric. He grew up to be honest, kind, and principled. He is now 21 years old. He is attending university while being groomed as the successor to Dylan's company. Now that I'm 56, I started to think seriously about the future, when a shocking incident occurred. "Nice to meet you. I'm Brenda. The president always takes such good care of me." She greeted me in a drawn-out manner, a new employee at Dylan's company. Her appearance added another worry to my list. My first impression of Brenda was that she was a beauty who would fit right into the glamorous world. She had sharp features, a good figure, and seemed to be about 5 feet 5 inches tall. She had worked as a model while in college, I heard. She's not modeling now since she joined Dylan's company as a new employee, but she still has an unmistakable aura. The reason she came to greet me was that she moved into the house next door. The apartment next to ours is rented entirely as company housing, primarily for single employees. Brenda, living alone, preferred it for its cheaper rent compared to regular apartments. Everyone knows that the company president's house is next to the company housing. So at first, I thought Brenda had simply come over to greet us. But, unexpectedly, she made a shocking statement. "Just between us, I think the president really likes me. During my interview, he complimented my looks a lot, and I come from a pretty good university." "Oh, were you a high school graduate?" Sorry about that." Her words clearly looked down on me, making me tremble with anger. "Education is just a part of the process to me. If it doesn't lead to results, it doesn't mean much. That's how I see it." Sparks flew between me and Brenda. I've always been competitive and can't help responding to unpleasant comments. In elementary school, I was often teased by classmates for being raised by my grandparents. I didn't want to drag that bitter feeling forever, so I made sure to express my dislike clearly. Brenda, perhaps not expecting me to retort, was momentarily taken aback. However, an unexpected ally appeared. "Oh, isn't that Brenda? How's work? Getting used to it?" It was Dylan. Of course, he wasn't on my side but supported Brenda, whom he favored. "Abby, stop being so childish. Isn't it embarrassing for the wife of the president? This is why I don't want to introduce you in front of everyone. Don't make me ashamed any more than this, okay?" "Yeah, I got it." He has always been like this. Always putting me down and never once standing by my side. The reason I still live with him is because of Eric. He is a junior in college, and he has a little over a year left. But once he enters society, I've thought it might be time to end things with him. That means I only need to endure for less than 2 more years. And so, I continued this false marriage with him. However, the arrival of this new employee, Brenda, would unexpectedly derail my plans. Not long after Brenda moved into the company housing, I discovered something significant. Ugh, Dylan, do you really like me that much? Of course, I prefer a young girl like you over an old hag any day. You're so cute and I love you. That day, Dylan had said he couldn't come home because of an important business deal. So, I decided to eat out alone. Being by myself for the first time in a while, I thought I'd enjoy a drink. While walking through the urban hub, I witnessed Brenda and Dylan walking arm in arm. And I was speechless when I saw the building they entered. Dylan was definitely having an affair with Brenda. Since then, I've been quietly making certain moves, of course, without letting them realize it. Months later, Dylan said with a creepy smile, "I got an employee pregnant, so I'm divorcing you. The position of being the company president's wife will go to her." The employee, that girl he referred to, was undoubtedly Brenda. I understood instantly. I just glared at him in silence. Then, without showing any remorse, he thrust the divorce papers in front of me. "Are you serious? She's only 23, right? Plus, a new employee getting pregnant by the president and taking over as his wife is unheard of. None of that matters. Do you seriously think you can take responsibility for her life?" After 30 years together, I guess I did have some affection for him. That's why I said it as a warning, but Dylan didn't think at all and started complaining to me. "Are you kidding me? I'm the president of the company. As long as I'm here, Brenda won't be threatened, and I can provide for her. You, a non-productive housewife, should worry about being divorced and left by your husband." His usual attitude finally made me feel that my love for Dylan had completely dried up. And my heart, now empty, filled with hatred. "Yeah, sure. If you say so, I won't stop you. But just don't regret it," I said as a final warning, but it didn't seem to resonate with Dylan. "Regret? I won't. Unlike you, a housewife with no real career, I've been winning from the start. Now go on, live as a lonely woman divorced at 56. Thus, a period was put on our 30 years of marriage. Men have no prohibition period for remarriage, so once divorced, they can marry someone else immediately. Dylan, having received the divorce papers I signed, submitted them along with Brenda's marriage registration, probably confusing the city hall staff. But that aside, it seemed divorcing me and marrying Brenda was a foregone conclusion, and they soon flew abroad. Their purpose was a wedding ceremony. Perhaps they couldn't invite employees to a wedding stemming from an affair, but they still had a grand ceremony with a small number of guests. I wonder how much they spent. After their wedding overseas, they enjoyed their honeymoon and returned home after about 2 weeks. After the divorce, Dylan moved out, perhaps buying a condominium somewhere, and now lives there with Brenda. However, when he returned for something he forgot, I greeted him with a thin smile and said, "Did you check your credit card statement properly?" Startled by my sudden question, he looked visibly uncomfortable. But his expression fell with my next words. I kept quiet, but that girl. "What?" "Seems she's hooked on a guy from the nightclub." "Huh? Wait, what are you talking about all of a sudden? Nightclub? That can't be, she's a pure maiden." Seeing him say such things gave me chills. However, the fact that Brenda was into nightclubbing remained unchanged, no matter what anyone said. As he looked incredulous, I placed a photo in front of him. And just like that, he let out a silent scream. Thought cheating and divorcing was the end? Thought a housewife like me wouldn't know anything, so wouldn't claim compensation in a divorce court? Haha, how funny. Unfortunately, I had been preparing all along to get back at you both, with enough care to have such photos ready. Dylan, with trembling hands, somehow lifted the photo and scrutinized it. This blonde guy is from the nightclub? Yes, that's right. It's from one of the highest-rated places in the urban hub, apparently. Brenda has the means to treat these men? Based on the empty bottles nearby, I'd estimate she spent well over $10,000. $10,000? There's no way she has that kind of spare cash. Repeating my words, Dylan buried his face in his hands. Then, as if coming to his senses, he started checking his credit card statement on his smartphone. His face grew increasingly pale. As I thought, Brenda had been using Dylan's credit card to lavish money on men. For her, it was a way to get pampered by men without spending her own money. There couldn't be a more convenient ATM than that. Yes, he was completely duped by her. Realizing this, he looked up at me and asked, "Can I claim this as unauthorized use with a credit card company?" There's no way. She's not a minor but a full-grown 23-year-old. Plus, she's your spouse. It's not like she stole the card, you gave her the freedom to use it, right? As I said this, Dylan continued with an agonized expression. I gave it to her for household expenses, thinking she'd use a few $1,000s at most, maybe up to $100,000. But to spend it on men? That's inconceivable. What's going on? He was lamenting, but it was his own fault. He failed to see her true nature and gave her a credit card with a limit that exceeded $10,000. I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of the situation. Hours later, I received a call from Brenda. Hey, were you secretly digging into my affairs? I got back and Dylan showed me the photo and accused me. Unbelievable. Seriously, stop it with your ugly, old jealousy. The photo I showed him earlier was brought back by him and used to confront her. Seems like she got a good scolding, revealing a side of her that's far from the usual charming facade. I almost burst into laughter. Dylan was one thing, but she was another story. Being cheated on and having my husband stolen justifies this, doesn't it? The affair is a fact, but without objective evidence, you might have denied it. So, I asked a detective to provide indisputable evidence of the affair, whether it's photos or audio. I responded calmly. She seemed to be grinding her teeth on the other end of the line. After a few seconds of silence, she huffed and said, "Then fine. This is defamation, so I'm going to sue you." Huh? I let out an incredulous laugh. Did she really understand the meaning of defamation when she said that? In this case, Brenda and Dylan, who ended a 30-year marriage due to an affair, are on the offending side. If anyone were to sue, it would be me, the victim. I was astounded by Brenda's misunderstanding. But her misconceptions didn't stop. I have Dylan, the ultimate ATM. A little cry, and he's immediately back on my side, and you're nothing. Just wait until the day you're the one crying. With that, she hung up abruptly. Naturally, Brenda ended up being the one to suffer later on. A few days after I exposed Brenda's true nature to Dylan, Brenda came to me begging for forgiveness. About the compensation in the divorce, if I'm sued, I'll pay, so could you tell Dylan? Suing a 23-year-old for marital fraud seems a bit much. The turn of events was as I expected, and I couldn't help but laugh. Brenda frowned for a moment but, realizing her current predicament, could only glare at me resentfully. Dylan, being a company president, had connections with lawyers. That's probably why you asked. So, he inquired whether he could sue her for marital fraud. Brenda had clearly stated she viewed him as an ATM, showing no love. And regarding the pregnancy, if it turned out not to be his child, the outcome was clear. Despite her bravado, when faced with the possibility of being sued, she was powerless. That's why she came to me for help. Ironically, I was the only one who could stop Dylan in this situation. Unfortunately, I am human too, and I have feelings about the way you two treated me. Paying money isn't going to settle everything, you know? You knew he was married and yet engaged in an affair, and even got pregnant. Can you understand the mental anguish I experienced when I found out? Without a single laugh and speaking rapidly, I told Brenda, who seemed to shrink away in fear. She had no words to return. Let me be clear, I have no intention of forgiving Brenda or Dylan. I thought it was about time to settle this. I had been somewhat considerate because Brenda was pregnant, but it seems that's no longer necessary. I had made up my mind. Let's handle the future through lawyers, shall we? I don't plan to drag this on forever. Be prepared. With a glare, Brenda let out a small scream and ran away. If her feelings were so weak that she'd flee from harsh words, she shouldn't have started this in the first place. But once something has happened, there's no undoing it. A few days later, Dylan came to my house. He had a smile plastered on his face, as if it were glued on, pleading for a reconstruction of our relationship. The audacity was astounding. Thinking so, I quickly dispelled his hopes. Now you want to start over? What kind of nerve do you have? Besides, I told you, didn't I? Can you take responsibility for her life after getting your 23-year-old girlfriend pregnant? I never imagined she would be such a deceitful woman. Using my credit card to lavish gifts on men, buying luxury goods at will. Because of her, I lost about $50,000 from my savings. That was good information. I smirked and said, "That's our joint savings, right? I'll remind you, we need to split the amount from the time we divorced. I believe we had about $200,000 saved up as a married couple, right? I'll be taking $100,000 as my share of the marital assets. Unfortunately, since Brenda spent your share, all that's left for you is $50,000. At that, Dylan began to get angry. He argued that the money Brenda spent was an ineffective force, so we should divide the assets at $150,000. His self-centered argument finally brought me to my limit of patience. If he was the one cheated on, maybe he could make such a claim, but since his affair partner wasted the marital savings on other men, he had no right to say anything. And he was forgetting one more crucial thing, which I decided to remind him of. I checked with the lawyer, and dividing the $200,000 at the time of our divorce for the property division is a done deal. Plus, Dylan, you should be prepared. You're getting removed from the company's top position. What? No, divorce and the company have nothing to do with each other. The company is mine, I built it. The property division shouldn't. He was cut off when the living room door opened, and the person standing there made Dylan freeze. It was Eric. Dad, I'm disappointed. To think you'd rather not pay off your mistress' splurges with your own savings, so you dip into the company's funds. At that moment, his demeanor completely changed. Until then, he might have appeared somewhat confident, perhaps thinking he could talk his way out of it with me. But with Eric's arrival and his statement, Dylan found himself in a tight spot. Now, as he pointed out, Dylan had been tampering with the company's funds. It's not a cute amount like a few $1,000. Not just a few $1,000s, but over $100,000 had been embezzled. Dad, You know I've been studying economics and business at university while working in accounting at your company, right? When I noticed something was off and conducted an internal investigation, it turned out Dad was embezzling company money, he stated, presenting irrefutable evidence. Realizing escape was futile, Dylan, like Brenda before him, pleaded repeatedly for forgiveness. I was wrong. I admit it. So, Eric, can't you overlook it? I'm your dad. Abby, we were married for 30 years. Be a bit kinder to me. Please. Such a shallow apology was unnecessary. Neither my nor Eric's feelings had changed at all. The executives had already agreed that someone like him could not be entrusted with the company. By the time Dylan realized it, it was too late, and all he could do was cry and apologize. Then, someone barged in. It was obvious who it was: Brenda. So you were here. Since the man thing came out, you haven't come home, and you've been avoiding me at work. Fine, I'm divorcing Dylan. The child is definitely yours, so you'll be paying alimony and compensation in the divorce. Facing her red-faced anger, it wasn't me or Dylan who responded, but Eric. Brenda, do you understand why I became Mom and Dad's adopted son? Huh? Because this old lady is infertile. Mom is not infertile. The one who is infertile is Dad. At that moment, the atmosphere froze. After starting infertility treatments, we couldn't get cooperation from him. He might be infertile. But without his cooperation for the tests, there was nothing we could do. I had given up then, but now I couldn't shake off my suspicion. Brenda was 23, and I was in my early 30s when we started the treatments. Though there's a difference, fertility rates don't change much until about 35. So when I learned Brenda was pregnant, I decided to visit someone. That someone was the gynecologist Dylan had initially recommended. I was really conflicted about going, but I thought maybe they knew something and sought help. That's when I found out the shocking truth. I wasn't infertile, but Dylan was. Apparently, he has no ability to impregnate anyone. Before dating me, his ex-girlfriend told him to get tested reluctantly. Knowing his pride and their acquaintance, the doctor didn't tell the truth and said there were no issues. When visiting the doctor, a friend worried about me insisted on coming along, but I never imagined finding out such a fact. As a doctor, not disclosing the actual test results wasn't right. But blaming him now doesn't change anything. The fact remains, you are infertile. So, Brenda, how exactly did you conceive his child? Brenda started to falter. If she truly believed Dylan was the father, she could have outright denied my claims. Her inability to do so probably meant something. Dylan, more upset by Brenda piling on lies than the revelation of his infertility, began to berate her fiercely. Seeing them about to start an ugly argument, I intervened. Brenda initially approached you to use you. That's an undeniable fact. I understand your anger, but you cheated on me first. That's also a fact. Before you two start a nasty fight, isn't there something you should say to me? With a glare, Dylan shut his mouth. Then Brenda said, I'm sorry. I never thought it would come to this. Oh? So you destroyed a family with that mindset? She could only cry and keep apologizing. I couldn't bear to watch. Exchanging a nod with Eric, I presented them with the documents for the compensation claim in the divorce court. Seeing it, Dylan's voice cracked. Hey! What's with this amount? It's ridiculous. Divorce settlements for cheating are supposed to be around $30,000 at most, right? What is this amount? The amount I demanded was $100,000. It's understandable to be shocked by the high figure, but there's a valid reason for it. For the past 10 years, Dylan, despite being in a superior position as the company's president, had not given me, a housewife, any living expenses. I managed because I had about $100,000 inherited from my parents. I used it for living expenses and Eric's education, so frankly, my personal savings were zero. Inheritance isn't subject to division, yet I had to use it because Dylan didn't provide living expenses. It was a force majeure. And the final straw was the affair. The higher the social status of the party involved, the higher the compensation in a divorce court due to responsibility, as explained by the lawyer. I went through all past cases, searching for someone in a similar situation as me. I found cases where individuals won over $100,000 in the past. The amount my lawyer and I proposed wasn't just arbitrarily high, it was calculated based on Dylan's conduct over the past 10 years, his position as a president, his ability to pay, and his behavior after the affair was revealed. In other words, it was justified. If they had complaints, they were prepared to make them pay this amount even if it meant going to court. Not providing living expenses to your housewife, and making me pay for that and the education fees from my inherited money, knowing well enough that you weren't giving any. No remorse from you, and Brenda even threatened to sue for defamation. You too fulfill the conditions for a high compensation in divorce court. Then Brenda desperately clung to a pathetic plea. Please wait. I'm reflecting now. So what? Expecting leniency or a reduction? Such a change of heart. I was beyond angry. I was astounded. With a heavy sigh, I glared at her and said, "Now you're desperate and want forgiveness? A reduction? Or perhaps to be overlooked? Such naive thoughts won't work." Eventually, Brenda became speechless, just biting her lip and looking at me. Turning to Dylan, he let out a small shriek. Then he started saying the unimaginable. I was, like Abby, deceived by her. Yes, I'm a victim too. So, let's fight this together. Huh? The thought of abandoning her to lighten his financial burden in the divorce settlement. He must be aiming for that by reconciling with me. To think such a shallow man was my husband embarrassed me. Both of you are pathetic. If you cheat, take responsibility till the end. That's what adults do. You're not children who've just learned to talk. Eric joined in the argument. This is the worst. I no longer see you as my dad. My only parent is Mom. Brenda, if you're here just to cheat, you might as well leave. Said and done, the two were unable to retort and just collapsed on the spot. After involving our lawyers in discussions, we settled on $70,000. Initially, my lawyer had said that getting $40,000 to $50,000 would be good. But I couldn't forgive his actions, so I insisted on $100,000. Even if reduced, I was confident of securing about $50,000. The final conclusion was that Dylan's affair, without providing living expenses or paying for our child's education, was egregious. And this was determined in court. As a result, Dylan and Brenda were ordered to pay $70,000. Dylan was arrested for embezzling company funds, receiving a suspended sentence. With a suspended sentence, he avoided prison but fell into a debt hell, hitting rock bottom. Of course, he ended with Brenda. She tried to find the father among dozens of candidates but eventually gave up. The child was placed in a facility, arguably better off than being raised by her. Brenda resigned and, after being employed elsewhere for a low wage, also took up night jobs to continue paying the divorce compensation to me. Dylan was ousted from the company, unable to find employment due to spreading rumors, now juggling part-time jobs. They had to let go of the condominium they lived in and now likely reside in an old, drafty apartment. The executive director took over as the new president, with plans to pass it on to Eric when ready. The company took a significant hit but is now moving forward united. I got money and the house in the property division but sold the house to live in a smaller apartment, finding it more peaceful. This is somehow more calming. Eric graduated from university successfully and is respected in the company. After a tumultuous decade and divorce process, I now look forward to a peaceful retirement. Enjoying the straight and honest young man he has become, unlike his irresponsible father.